The Judicial Crisis Network, a conservative group, launches a $500,000 campaign to stop gridlock in confirming conservative judges. Pro-life leaders say stopping the gridlock is key to ensuring there are pro-life judges at every level. Here's a look at their new ad.
It's a hidden scandal. Democrats abusing Senate rules, using gridlock and obstruction to keep liberals in control of our courts. There are now more vacancies than when Trump took office.
There were 105 judicial vacancies when President Trump took office. The number has now risen to almost 140. The Susan B. Anthony list is joining the Judicial Crisis Network in their campaign to fill the vacancies. Joining us now is Carrie Severino, the Chief Counsel and Policy Director of Judicial Crisis Network. She's previously clerked for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Carrie, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Can you share why it's so important to fill out all the judicial nominations at all levels within the U.S. for the pro-life cause?
Well, we so often focus on the Supreme Court, and that's correct. I mean, it's the highest court in the land, but they take far less than 1% of all the cases that happen in the country. So they aren't there to correct every error and make sure that things are running on par here. And we see cases, I think a lot of your viewers will be familiar with, the cases with David Daleiden and the Centers for Medical Progress, undercover videos exposing stem cell express, et cetera. Those cases we're seeing in the court where we have a judge that's refusing to recuse himself despite his links to Planned Parenthood itself, socking them with really unreasonable fines. That's the kind of thing that can happen, and it's so important that not just those high-profile cases, but every case in the system is dealt with fairly, even-handedly, and you have judges who are enforcing the law as it's written and not just kind of making it up on the fly and doing their own thing.
Pro-lifers, and we often speak about the need to have pro-life judges. But does a pro-life judge actually exist? I mean, the late Justice Antonin Scalia wouldn't have considered himself as such.
Right. He was pro-life, but he would have said, I'm not a pro-life judge. His philosophy is, we need to enforce as judges, and you take an oath as a federal judge to uphold the Constitution and to uphold the laws of the country. And luckily for us, the Constitution actually doesn't require abortion. I think that's the problem, is you have people who are reading things into the Constitution that are not in fact there. So you need judges who are going to faithfully interpret the Constitution, and that's a judge that's actually going to, in many cases, come out with pro-life results because the Constitution itself doesn't take a stand on that issue. That was Justice Scalia's position. I think that's correct.
And same with Gorsuch, to my
Absolutely.
understanding as well. Now, there are more judicial vacancies than when President Trump took office. How is this happening?
It's really shocking. He started office with 105 vacancies. That's more than 4 out of 5 of his predecessors had. But ever since January, it's already ballooned almost a third. We have 139 vacancies now. We know of 21 more that are people who've announced that they're going to retire. So that brings us to 160. I mean, this is skyrocketing. The problem is we have Democrats who have been just so incensed. They're still upset about November's election.
Right.
They're putting the brakes on in every procedural way they can to try to block these nominees from getting confirmed. And it's really threatening to them, particularly because they're very qualified nominees. And you see in particular the qualified women like Justice Joan Larson or Amy Coney Barrett, a Notre Dame professor, who they hate the idea of having really principled, really qualified, conservative female jurists on the courts, because that puts the lie to some of their identity politics, and they know these are people in line for the Supreme Court one day.
And they could have a huge impact. Now, you say we can end this obstruction, though, by adopting Senator James Lankford's gridlock reform proposal. Can you explain that proposal to us?
Right. There's a rule that Democrats are exploiting that lets them force 30 hours of debate on any nominee. And that's something that didn't normally used to happen, especially for these non-controversial nominees. They're doing it for 100% of Trump's nominees. Even one example I think illustrates it. It was someone he nominated that was a previous Obama nominee. It was a good faith renomination of someone Obama had nominated. He had 100% support in the Senate, 100 votes in favor, but they forced them to run out the clock on all of these procedures. That's really a partisan obstructionism, and it's at the rate we're going. Again, we're outstripping the nominations. We've only had 4 nominations so far. We have 139, almost 160 vacancies coming soon. We need to pick up the pace, and we can't be wasting time that should be spent on the real business of the Senate.
The groups you're partnering with for this campaign, such as the Susan B. Anthony list, will be organizing activists at town halls that are led by Democrats. What's the goal with that?
They want to make sure that the Democrats don't buy into Chuck Schumer's policy of, like, let's just block the Trump administration at every turn. Want to make sure that they're doing things. There's another process called the blue slip process where home state senators can try to slow the nominees from their state, and we've seen that happen with some senators. I think it's happening right now in Colorado. There's Allison Ide, who's a justice in the Supreme Court. They're very popular in her state, but the senator's not responding to what the interests of his state, and he opposed Gorsuch for the same reasons. Broad bipartisan support in his state, but they're trying to use these procedures. We want people to make sure they're putting pressure on the senators to say, hey, these are justices who are judges who are going to be great on the courts. They're incredibly qualified. They're committed to the Constitution. Let's not throw up roadblocks.
Really make a difference at that grassroots level there. Now, Carrie, while I have you, and as we're speaking about the courts, dare you make any predictions as to whether or not you think President Trump will have any more opportunity to nominate a U.S. Supreme Court justice?
Well, it's impossible to tell when or how or who they would be replacing, but I think it's very likely he will have another nomination. We've got several justices in the court who are in their 80s, and I think that, it's definitely possible that we'll have another vacancy on the court. I would be thrilled to have that happen because I'm just so happy with Justice Gorsuch and the quality of that nomination that I think it would be a wonderful thing to have more nominees in that line.
Carrie Severino of Judicial Crisis Network, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.